So please welcome Hamid Montakab.
Thank you. So profiting from the energetics of the head that we started yesterday, first of all, let's look at what the head represents in terms, energetic terms. It's, of course, typically Chinese represent the head as a circle. We know that's the symbol of heaven, and the earth is represented by a square, which actually represents the trunk of the body, where the zangfu are situated. And the junction between the head and the body is the neck. And the neck, energetically, interestingly, is an area of conversion. That means that what, for example, starts on the top crosses over to the other side. We know this for the neurological system. We know that the left brain controls the right side and the right brain the left side. But energetically also, I've mentioned the channels which are known to do this conversion. The main channel that we know in the primary channels is, of course, Yangming, the large intestine. This phenomenon of conversion has a lot of importance in pre- and post-heaven energetics. Sometimes you might have wondered why, for example, they say that the heavenly Taiyang, when it reaches the earth, becomes the cold climate, which doesn't make sense. Why Taiyang becomes the cold? The Tsuyin becomes the wind, and so on and so forth. So this is just a reminder that the neck energetically plays a very important role in the junction between heaven and earth, and therefore the neck points are very important. I think it was in the last time I was here, we spoke about the windows of heaven and the importance they have in the head energetics. So obviously, when we talk about head pathologies, and that was one of the topics that I covered in the last book, is headaches and all the pathologies of the portals, sensory organs, the face, etc. We are going to be speaking a lot about the Jingbei divergent channels, which connect, according to the French school, all of them have a connection to a window of heaven, and therefore play a very important role. The Jingbei are given for chronic, recurrent conditions, which means that we don't think about Jingbei in acute conditions, but in recurrent and chronic conditions. The same is valid for the extraordinary channels. So, as a reminder, the head energetics basically is an extension of the original fire. The fire of Mingmen in the embryo, we talked about the embryo elongating yesterday, and as it elongates, it starts developing a head and a tail. That means it starts polarizing, and in this polarization, what is very important is the development of the fire from the original kidney fire. Starts developing the digestive fire and then the heart fire. They are interrelated. It's very important to remember that the digestive fire actually is an extension of kidney fire, which explains why when we age, we start having so many difficulties digesting. A lot of elderly people cannot digest, and they're always wondering, I used to eat all this, and now I cannot, and it gives me this and that. It's the digestive fire. It's the same as the kidney fire. As the sexuality sort of declines, so does the digestion. And heart fire, of course. Remember that the Sinbao, heart protector, is an extension of kidney fire in the chest. And then the heart fire extends further and is going to involve the head. We mentioned yesterday that the Chinese always say the emperor, the fire emperor, has two residences, the earthly residence and the heavenly residence. So the mental functions, therefore, are going to be controlled by the heart fire. Now, the head is the seat of the upper dantian. The Chinese have described 3 dantian, and the translation of dantian is very interesting. It's a fire center in a way, and not to be confused with the triple warmer fire centers. The triple warmer is about production and transformation of energy, and the 3 centers are forcibly located in the earth part of the human, that means in the trunk. Whereas the dantian are another type of transformation, and they call it more a spiritual transformation. The word dantian, the French school has translated it as chamber of cinnabar. Now, cinnabar was a potion, a magical, it was a mercury-based sulfide, which was used by the alchemist, pretending to transform sort of lesser metals into gold. They were using cinnabar. So cinnabar symbolized this alchemical transformation of something base into something more subtle, more superior. So the word dantian, actually, I have not found a better translation than the cinnabar chambers, the 3 cinnabar chambers, which are the alchemical transformational centers. So basically, the upper dantian will be representing, therefore, the psycho-spiritual transformations of the human. The lower is very interesting. It corresponds, of course, to the uterus and to the reproductive capacities. Reproduction here is about the continuation of the species. The middle dantian, which is basically centered in the chest, and we know the area of Zhongqi. And this is the area representing the maintenance of life, in a sense. The triple warmer is about maintaining life, about transformation. So it's post-heaven. And then the upper dantian is about the spiritual transformations. The seat of the upper dantian is described to be behind the third eye. Obviously, the 3 areas which are protecting these transformational centers anatomically also represent a special particularity. It's the skeleton. We see the upper dantian, the skull, has the strongest skeleton because it has the most noble material and the most delicate substance. The middle dantian, the heart and the lungs, are protected by the chest cavity, by the ribs, which are not as strong, but still they give a certain protection. And finally, the lower dantian is the pelvic structure, which supposedly is protecting, is the least important of them. So the basic 3 dantian, which are enclosing the 3 treasures, are protected by also anatomical structures. The mediation between them is the spine. And the spine, of course, is energetically controlled by Dume, that we spoke about yesterday. And therefore, we see that the Du is going to probably represent the primary extraordinary to deal with head energetics. Obviously, if we were speaking about other structures which mediate between these, will be the muscular structure, the Jingjin, the sinew channels, and the sinew channels which basically are regulating the relations between these. We talk about 5 groups of muscles, the 5 axes or wushu, and they are the muscles which are, for example, the sternocleidomastoid muscle is the main muscle junction between the head and the chest, and abdominal rectus muscle between the thorax and the pelvis, the iliofemoral muscles, the spinal muscles, the paravertebral muscles, etc. So they all play very important roles in maintaining the balance. It's very important to remember that ultimately the head has to be kept horizontal. It's very important also for the balance centers. So the whole body is playing in order to keep the head in a horizontal and balanced position. And therefore the muscles are going to interact. And all of these muscular groups, for those of you who do, for example, body work or osteopathy, there is one point indicated in Chinese text, which is name is Wushu, 5 axis. It's gallbladder 27. And this point is fabulous because it helps to regulate all of these muscles. And I do it very often in association, people who need, for example, osteopathic adjustments. And they often come for acupuncture. They say the osteopath, he puts it back, but it doesn't stay. Obviously, it doesn't stay in place because there is this tension of the muscles which are preventing from the vertebral adjustment to maintain. And sometimes I say, okay, before your session, come for acupuncture, and I do the wushu, and it's amazing. Just this point, sometimes, of course, if they have specific problems in a certain area of the spine, we can always add the huatujiaji. Anyway, that's besides the topic. Now, this slide we already saw yesterday. It's a repetition, just a reminder that the basic yuan qi, which is stored in the dong qi, or in the form of dong qi. The dong qi is the moving qi between the kidneys. It's the inherited heritage of our parents and of our ancestors, which is going to be stored in the lower dantian, and from there it's distributed by the action of kidney fire, which is transforming it into kidney qi, and it's distributed via the du to the bladder channel, and from there it is distributed to all the to the zangfu and to the primary channels. This explains the point name of source, yuan points of the channels, which are in connection with this. I have heard sometimes people mistake because it's called the source point. When you needle it, it depletes the source. Not at all. You cannot deplete the source. This point is just activating this passage of energy from the source to the channel. So you cannot overstimulate them. That's why the source points are always considered very important tonifying points for the channel. So again, this slide we saw yesterday, it's the function of the mind in relation to the 3 substances, Jing, Qi, and Shen that we have been talking about, and that all of these are, in a sense, supported by kidney fire. It's very important to remember this relation because this explains also the diminished mental capacity in elderly patients, because as the kidney fire gets weaker, progressively not only the sexuality gets weaker, but also the digestive system and the brain functions. This is why it's a sort of normal physiological aging process which occurs with the diminished mental capacities. Obviously, the same as with Jing, not everybody is equal. We have some people who are aged persons who have an excellent memory and mental capacity, and others that already at the age of after 60 or 70, it starts declining. We know that Alzheimer's can affect, Alzheimer is one type of amnesic condition. There are many others. And for some reason, Alzheimer's has become more famous these days. It has because it has affected famous people, so obviously it has more of an impact. Now, the portals, which are an important function taking place in the head, the Chinese describe 9 portals. These are the openings through which the human being communicates with the outer world. 7 of these portals are situated in the head. Once again, always I remind the the people that the Chinese, when they use numbers, these numbers are not mathematically meant. This is very important, especially when I'm teaching Germans, because Germans are very specific. 5 emotions, it has to be 5. 7 passions, it has to be 7. No, 5 and 7 are symbols. The same as 9 is a symbol. 9 is 3 times 3. It's the human's sort of full circle of life. That's why all the old Chinese texts had 81 chapters. It's not like they didn't know how to count beyond. It's just symbolic. So the same with 9. Some people say, how come in the lower part there is only urethra and anus and not the, not the genital opening? In men it's the same. In women it's 2 different openings, so it doesn't make sense. No, this is symbolic. 2 is yin, 7 is yang. To represent that 7 in the head is yang part of the body, has 7 openings to the outside. Now, what is interesting is amongst these openings, they have considered that eye and the ear are energetic receptors, whereas the nose and the mouth are actually material. So the 2 are yang and the 2 are yin. And this, of course, the Chinese had no way of knowing, but we know that, for example, the nose and the mouth, the smell and the taste, we actually need molecules that go on this is a chemical receptor, whereas the eye and the ear are actually vibrational receptors. They translate and transmit the information vibrationally. So these are the portals that obviously we are going to be speaking about. And this slide, once again, we saw it yesterday, but it's important to remind because we are talking portals, and we see the importance of Shen in the management of sensory functions in 2 ways. One is actually the presence of Shen, as opposed to being in a coma, being asleep, being under hypnosis, which sometimes also might be people who are under shock. They are not in a coma, but they are not present. The Shen is disconnected. The same with out-of-body experience, which is now fashionable to talk about. The same also fashionable is the near-death experience, which is in a sense an out-of-body experience. When people are detached from the body, but there is a consciousness which is still present. The consciousness might be oriented towards the body. This is happening to a lot of people under general anesthesia, describe observing themselves being operated from above. And they can tell you the whole process, what was said, what was done, etc., etc. So it's for medical doctors, this is an anomaly. This is really not explainable. So we have this capacity of out-of-body experience, and this out-of-body experience with training, you can keep your consciousness. This is the same as with dreams. In Oriental and Taoist trainings, the idea is to bring the consciousness into the dream. That means that we have conscious dreaming. This is everybody apparently has had an experience of conscious dreaming a few times in their lifetime, accidentally, without doing it on purpose. But this can be trained, and when they say you have a conscious dreaming, you can direct your dream where you want it to go. Now, remember that the dream is the Hun, and the Hun travels, has the capacity to go out of the body and to travel, to come and go, as they say. And the Hun has the capacity to travel, obviously, during dreams. And imagine all you can do during your dream if you send your Hun where you want it to go and bring back the information or whatever. And remember that Hun can travel both ways, past and future. People who are doing past life experience, actually, they are helping your Hun to travel backwards. And this backwards, we are not limited in time just to the time of birth, obviously. We can go further. People can go to anywhere they want or to the future. Some people have this talent, it's easy for them, and others it needs training. And the training for conscious dreaming is a very laborious training. It's not easy to do. We tried it. It's quite a lot of work. Anyway, the sensory functions therefore depend greatly on the perception of Shen, and obviously the sensory organs. It was very interesting because I dropped in on John Hicks yesterday, and he was talking about how we do not perceive the same things. We don't share what we see or observe, and it's absolute fact. We don't. Even if we have perfect vision, two people don't see the same thing. They don't see the same nuance of colors, because there's a lot of conditioning which also influences what we see. And there are many, many cases where there are these tests that you can do. They give you a page of words all misspelled, but the first and the last letters are correct, and your mind corrects it. And just go through the text, reading it. Something is wrong, but you have read the text. Or even better, you know that when you see, do you see a black hole in your vision, in your field of vision? You don't. And in fact, there is a black hole where we have the retinal chiasma, where all the retinal nerves gather. There is no receptor. So in fact, what you see has a black center, and the brain corrects it. And even better than that, you know that we see upside down? It's a lens. So what is reflected is upside down, but the brain corrects it. And this takes a newborn child, a while to master. That's why children, they have a strange rapport. They try to grab things and it somehow doesn't work. They are adjusting this depth management. And slowly at the beginning, when they see things, they have to readjust it. That's why they need to touch. Their first relation to the world is through the mouth. They put everything in the mouth. It's a primary sensory function which is actually active in a child. The others have to develop. So it's a very interesting, so the basic conditioning is going to define a lot our sensory functions. So what we take for granted, this is reality. I have seen it. Always put a little bit of thing. We don't share the same reality. And this is just what we see. There's so many other things, that's why it's like today we are in the world where there's so much conflict based on not accepting the other person's version of things. And unfortunately, this conflict is really destroying us until we maybe somehow find some intelligence somewhere. So this conditioning also does it that some information coming in is considered too strong, and we filter it out. This filtering basically is putting sort of like a distance between me and the world. The filtering, what is the best way to filter? Phlegm. Phlegm is a means for the body to protect itself against excessive information. So children who develop otospongiosis or otosclerosis in the ear are actually, it's a phlegm which is blocking the little bones transmitting the sound. Sinusitis, myopia or eye sensory visions, throat problems, all of these are manifestations of phlegm in the sensory functions to reduce the impact of the outside. Obviously, we are talking today about extraordinary channels, so I cannot diverge too much into the other systems, but our contact to the outer world, the Chinese have described a whole set of channels which are called connecting channels, the luo. The luo are not just about connecting two coupled channels, a yin-yang channel together. There is a major misconception about the luo, which basically is stemming from the fact that I mentioned yesterday that in the great burning of books, from the original 5 classical texts, 2 were lost. And especially the 2 that dealt with a lot of acupuncture points. And one of them dealt especially with Lo. This is why the information we find in the, for example, in the Ling Shu about the Lo is not complete. They talk about, they don't even distinguish the 2 pathways of the Lo. This is why people are so confused about the Lo. The longitudinal Lo, the Lo that follows the primary channel, is responsible for also connecting us to the outer world in all aspects, sensory functions, anatomical areas, limbs. For example, we saw yesterday, we talked about lung 7. Our contact to the world through the hand is called manipulation. So this is controlled by lung 7. So lung 7 has many, many different aspects and functions, not just the opening point of Ren Mei. It's also a major point allowing me to grasp and let go. So this, in this sense, we are using the Lo in much broader way, and of course all of these openings that I'm mentioning are going to be controlled by Lo, not necessarily the same Lo that is controlling the sensory function. For example, liver is responsible for vision, but the eye opening is controlled by the Lo of heart. We say the heart Lo, it goes to the eye and goes to the mouth. So the mouth speech also is controlled. I remind you that in Chinese, we talk about the 5 senses, and it's not the same as in the West. The sense of touch is not described. It's the 5 senses which are situated, of course, in the head, and the 5th sense is speech. Because what are the sensory functions? Is to communicate with the outside, and the communication to the outside is not just to receive the information, it's also to give information, and speech is sort of the ultimate communication with the outer world. You can see all of the animals have a form of speech. It gets more and more sophisticated as the animal evolves. You see the whales, for example, or the dolphins, they have a very elaborate speech. They transmit a lot of information. Whereas lower animals, they just have danger speech, sound, or whatever. I know, for example, our cat has a whole vocabulary, maybe 20 different sounds that makes us understand what he means or what he wants. So if a cat can do that, of course, in humans, it has taken the ultimate form of elaborate speech. But it already took centuries to develop, obviously. So this is one of the important aspects of the sensory functions that we have to deal with in pathology. For example, the reduced sensory functions is not, we're not just going to be looking at the zhang fu responsible for vision. We have to also look at the orifice. We also have to look at the other aspects. Maybe it's the shenming which is deficient. And we will see that there is a condition in Chinese medicine which is quite famous. Took me years to understand. Phlegm misting the orifices of the heart. You've come across that? What the hell is that? And I was braced. Everybody, some people were saying, oh, phlegm missing orifice is arteriosclerosis. It's plaques. Yeah, that's very Western. Heart. But the Chinese don't speak about the heart organ. They're speaking about the heart brain, the functions of the heart in its imperial function, which is the sensory functions. So the phlegm misting, the orifices of the heart, are manifesting by reduced sensory functions. Slowly, slowly, the sensory functions are getting less. Then the person starts actually being disconnected with the outside. They don't recognize people. They don't know who they are. They don't know where they are. And ultimate evolution, coma. So you can see that there's these stages, and we see that in a lot of psychotic patients. It starts by a reduction of the sensory functions, all of them. I've observed it, their eyesight goes down, their hearing goes down, their smell goes down, and they start developing ageusia, which means loss of taste. When a patient starts representing these, you know they are on the path to blocking the orifices of the heart, and if it continues, there's going to be either amnesia or schizophrenia. Many types of psychotic episodes can come from that. And it's interestingly, obviously, we know that phlegm in Chinese medicine is the big enemy, it's a big challenge. There is TCM points. I mean, I dare you to get rid of phlegm with stomach 40. It's given in every book. It doesn't work. Stomach 40 is not for phlegm in the head, it's in the chest. So it's like TCM has tried to make it into segments, and we don't have many points working on that to clear the orifices of the heart from phlegm. It's a complicated thing. It needs acupuncture, and it needs know-how of which acupuncture system. And here we call on systems which are working deeper than primary channels, the Jingbei and the extraordinary. So in relation to extraordinary vessels, obviously all of them involve the head. This is one of the standard things we say about extraordinary. What they have in common is that they all have head symptoms or head pathology, even if they don't actually go to the head completely. Obviously, the Dumei has the most connection to the brain. It has, we're going to see it, and it's in charge of not only the relation to the self, but also the exchange with the outer world. And it supports the Wei Qi, which is at the same time supported and consolidated by Yang Wei. And the Yang Wei and Yang Chao have a lot of points on the head. And these are the trajectories. There are variations described in text, but it's very interesting. We'll see a lot of gallbladder points, stomach and triple wormer points involved in the Yang Wei. This is a mistake. The Yin Chao, the Yang Chao and Yin Chao also are important in regulation of rhythms, and especially night and day. So they are very much involved in day and night sleep cycles. We are going to have a look at it. So we start with Chong. Actually, Chong doesn't go properly to the head, but it follows here the Ren and the stomach channel, and it connects with the eyes. But interestingly, it's the channel. I've given you the other symptoms just for memory, but interestingly, in the head, it has specific symptoms which we often see. Is one of the first symptoms we see with patients is hot head. And hot head, you can get it with all yang rising conditions, or what we call floating yang conditions. But with Chong, it has a specificity, hot head with ice cold feet. If you have this symptom, it's a sure sign that the Chong is disturbed. I have this incredible case, this was a man who was losing weight. He had lost 15 kilos in a month and a half, 2 months, and in Geneva, and they had done every test. Of course, losing weight like that, the first thing you think of is cancer. They had searched that. Then what he was explaining, he could eat in the morning, but if he ate in the afternoon, he would vomit. He couldn't hold down the food in the afternoons. That's why he was losing weight. He was basically having 1 meal out of 3. So they said stomach ulcers. They did all the explorations. Then they said probably he has too much acidity in the stomach. So they put a sound in the stomach measuring the stomach acidity 24 hours a day. They couldn't find anything. Finally, he ended up with a homeopath who couldn't do much, and he ended up with me. So he had already been like 2-3 months going around. And as it's a rebellious chi of stomach, obviously. The vomiting and not being able to eat. So I'm looking to regulate that, and I'm asking questions. And one thing he says, I always ask about sleep, as it's one of the topics that I have researched. It's one of the 10 questions, famous 10 questions, sleep thing. So I always ask about sleep. And he says, oh yeah, I cannot sleep if the window is not open. Now, in Geneva in winter, an open window is a problem. And he says, my wife is always complaining because I have to have the window open, otherwise I cannot fall asleep. I say, well, he says, yeah, I just have to have a breeze on my head. And then I ask him, do you have cold feet? And he laughs. I say, why? He says, my wife forces me to wear socks in bed because if I touch her with my feet, she wakes up. They're ice cold. So there the diagnostic was done. It's the rebellious chi. Chongmei was involved, and I just did the Chongmei. Obviously here I added Do 20, which is, I'm practically always doing Do 20, especially in counterflow chi of Chongmei. I added in, it's a point where the spleen, pulling, also regulating the spleen chi. And I did on the Chongmei, the stomach 21, which is a specific point to regulate the stomach and what we call harmonize the flow of stomach. I think I must have done this treatment 2 or 3 times, and it regulated the problem. That was almost, that this poor man, then I had to find out why this had happened. Meanwhile, it was already 3-4 months that he was going between doctors, and they couldn't find anything. And at the end, he was working as a driver in the bus system in Geneva. The doctor of the company said that he is faking it to get out of work. And they were ready to actually kick him out of the work because they believed he was faking it. He was asking for psychiatric evaluation that this man was faking it. And it's amazing. After the treatments were regulated, I asked him I was trying to figure out what was causing the stomach yin deficiency with this rebellious chi of stomach. It was irregular meals. Lunch, I said, what are you having? I have a sandwich while I'm driving. And this is classic, describe that people eat while they're doing something else. So I said, can you have, because his life was irregular as a driver. Sometimes he started at 4 in the morning, sometimes at 10, sometimes in the afternoon. His life was very irregular. I said, can you have a regular shift? He said, not as a driver. I said, go to your company and ask if you can. And he finally got a desk job, which was regular hours, and the problem was solved. It would have been simple if we had right away seen the thing. But first he had to go through all this thing. But the Chong is amazing. And the feet are cold. I call them, my expression is sock cold. That means that they are very clearly delimited. Sometimes when you touch the foot, you can see that it's precisely at this level it's cold and above is normal temperature. So it's different than kidney yang deficiency, or for example, Daimei. Daimei would be the lower limbs. Kidney yang deficiency would be more the feet. And for example, gallbladder low also give you cold feet. Thank you. But there, it's really like socks. Okay. So I've given you some indication of points. This sensation of qi rushing up, we talked about it yesterday. It's this running piglet syndrome, which obviously means in our modern terminology, it's the panic attack. And the panic attacks are really sensations of very often people feel them in the chest. And it could also, sometimes they have a feeling that they cannot breathe. They have anxiety attack, palpitations. Sometimes they think they're having a heart attack. And also the heat rushing to the head. Sometimes they feel claustrophobic. They need to get out and get fresh air. I've treated many conditions of panic attack with Chong. I always add the complementary yin wei, because yin wei deals with especially the symptoms in the chest. And this is typically involving the Tsu yin channel. And that's why I throw in liver 3, Tai Chong. It's another Chong point. It's actually not a different meridian. It's still the Chong Mei that we are doing. And I combine it with pericard 7. So this is a very elegant treatment. Spleen 4 on the dominant side, if you prefer. Pericard 6 on the opposite. Liver 3 alternate on the opposite side. And pericard 7. So we have like this cross treatment, 4 points. And Renmei 18. Why 18 is the knot of Tsu yin. It's where the Tsu yin energy gathers. You're familiar with root, knot, and branch concept? No. Okay. You're not? It's an ancient concept. This is at the time where the channels were described to flow from the periphery towards the middle. Later, they changed the description of the channels. But originally, they were described, and therefore, all channels, like a tree, had a lower part, an upper part, and a middle part. The lower was called the root, the upper was called the branch, and the knot, obviously, where the energy was combining. So, for example, the Tai Yin channel, the root is spleen, the branch is lung, and the knot is Ren 12. Shall I remind you, it's the starting point of the lung channel, and it's the meeting point of the spleen channel. It's not just the mo of stomach. And then for Tsu Yin, liver, the pericardium, and Ren 18. And for Shaolin, kidney, heart, and Ren 23. These are very important points. The yang channels are less important because the yang channels, I remind you, they flow in continuum. Like a large intestine and stomach are directly connected. They have described 3 knot points, but they are not used as much. For the yin, they are very important because we use this concept when we want to, for example, tonify Tai Yin or Tsu Yin, we are going to use it. And also diagnostically, I find that in panic attacks, I always palpate the 2 points. Most people, Ren 17 is the most reactive. In people with a Tsu Yin issue, Ren 18 will be more reactive. So it's a confirmation. Okay, I have to stop. So prolapse and hernia, and then obviously the pure yang not ascending. This is something we are going to be using, the Jingbie of stomach and spleen. It's a very important aspect. You remember that the sensory organs we saw, they need Shen Ming, the clarity of Shen. The clarity of Shen Ming is coming from this pure yang that the triple warmer is producing, the stomach is extracting, and it's sending it upwards. We spoke about the Jingbie, I believe, last time I was here. I mean, chronic recurrent conditions. And the stomach and spleen Jingbie, they carry this pure yang from where it's produced towards the head, and obviously the points happens to be spleen 12, stomach 30, which is again Qi Chong, another Chong point. That's why the stomach and spleen Jingbie work intimately with Chong Mei. And obviously we always add Ren 12. Here we use it as the central point of the triple warmer. And stomach 9 is the window of heaven. Man welcome, which Ren Ying, which brings this clear yang to the head. And we finish the treatment with Dumei 20. And this is to bring the clarity to the sensory functions. Okay, I think it's a good place to have a break. We resume at 10.